Hilchos Metam'ei Mishkav Umoshav Perek Sheni. Hilchos Metam'ei Mishkav Umoshav Perek Sheni. The laws of those that transmit impurity to the things that they lie on or they sit on, chapter 2. Yesterday we introduced the people that we're talking about. Who are those people that transmit impurity to the things that they lie on and they sit on? That's a zav, a man who has an irregular discharge, a zava, a woman with an irregular blood flow, a nida, a woman on her regular period, and a yeled, that's a woman who gives birth. These four people are themselves an av hatumah, they're a primary source of impurity, and they have a severity over and above other primary sources of impurity, that not just do they communicate their impurity through the classic ways of touching and carrying, but if they lie down, or they sit, or they ride, as the Rambam mentioned yesterday, on things that are meant to be lied upon, or sat upon, or ridden upon, those things themselves, the Mishkav and the Umoshav themselves, become a primary source of impurity. That's why they're called Metam'ei Mishkav Umoshav, that's their unique feature. Now, exactly how that works is going to be discussed in later chapters. What we're discussing today is actually something that the Rambam mentioned at the end of yesterday's chapter. That is, in addition to the fact that the people, the Zav, Zava, Nida, Yeledas, themselves are a primary source of impurity, they also have what's called mashkin, bodily fluids, or in the commentaries they're called mayonos, springs, but it basically means the fluids that come out from them. And in terms of halacha, there are 9 different types of bodily fluids. 3 of them are completely pure, sweat, pus, and waste. We're not dealing with those. The other ones are the problematic ones. There are 3 that are actually an av hatumah just like them. Their spit, their saliva, their urine, and their semen itself is a primary source of impurity. And then we have some bodily fluids that are less. Tears, blood, and milk are vlad hatumah. They're one level down. And today we're going to really delve deeper into the exact definition of certain of these fluids and when and how they transmit impurity. Specifically, when dealing with blood, we'll deal with spit and with urine. So let's get into it. It says that Rambam halacha aleph, dam, nida, v'zava, v'yoldes. When we're talking about the blood of a nida or a zava, that's a woman with a regular or irregular blood flow, and a woman who gave birth, metam'ei lach v'yavish. So it communicates its impurity, which is a lower level of impurity, vlad hatumah, but the impurity is communicated both when it's moist and when it's dry. Avol zoivoy shel zav, but the discharge of the zav, verukai, and his spit, v'shichva zarei, and his semen, einay metamei ella kol zman shehu lach. These fluids are only transmitting impurity if they're moist. Avol yavish, yeser midai, but if they're too dry, einay metamei, they no longer communicate impurity. How do we define if it's too dry? V'ad kama, until what point is it considered moist, and then it crosses over into being dry? Im shayrin eisan b'paishin. Me'es le'es says that Rambam, the test is the following. You take warm water, and you soak these bodily fluids in that warm water for a 24-hour period. If after that 24-hour period, v'chezer l'kameis shahaya, these fluids revert back to being moist, hareza metamei belach, then it still communicates impurity, it's still considered to be moist. Even at the time you touched it, let's say, it was really congealed, but since the test of putting it into warm water will remelt it, so to speak, that tells you that at the time that you touched it, it was considered moist and you're impure. However, if it doesn't revert back to that state, then you know that it's dry, too dry, and it no longer communicates impurity. By the way, on this test that Rambam says, Im hayu hamayim poishirin mitchilasan, if the water was warm only at the beginning of the test, afal pisha einon poishirin b'seifan, even if it wouldn't be the same warmth, at the end of the test, it's still indicative of the status of this bodily fluid. And by the way, I should say the commentaries point out that you don't actually have to do the test. You just have to know that if you would do the test, what would be the results? All of these matters are matters received from tradition, even if they're not explicitly in the Torah. Halacha beis pishtan shetva'atu nida. Flax or linen that was spun by a woman who was a nida. And when spinning thread, today of course it's pretty much all done mechanically, but when you do it by hand, one of the ways that you make the spinning easier is by taking some saliva and wetting the thread. Now of course, spit, if the woman is a nida, is a source of impurity. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, hamesitoi toher, by default, if somebody were to cause this thread to move, they would be pure. Why? Because, what did we just say? That when it comes to spit or saliva, it does not communicate impurity if it's dry. And by the time the person will be touching the spun thread, the saliva in it will be dry. But if you know, and it's still moist, and you can see that saliva, Metam'ei, then it is going to communicate impurity, because of the spit that she used from her mouth to wet the thread, and the spit for her is one of the liquids that communicates impurity. Halacha Gimel, Zav shehiniach piv al pi hakois. Let us say that a zav, whose saliva, again, is one of those fluids that transmits impurity. A zav takes a cup to his mouth. He puts his mouth on the edge of the cup. And then in that moment, he changes his mind. He's not going to drink it. At that point, we don't say that the zav has placed his saliva onto the cup. And if a person were to cause the cup to move, thereby causing also the bodily fluid to move, you'd actually be pure because there is no bodily fluid. The spit doesn't come out at that point. But if the zav had actually drunk a little bit from the cup, at this point, the saliva is assumed to have mixed into the cup, and now one who causes the cup to move will become impure because of the liquid which came out of the mouth of the zav. If a zav bit into a piece of bread or into an onion, a person who would then cause these things to move would be pure, because these are very dry, or relatively dry items, and it doesn't cause any emission of saliva from the zav's mouth during the bite. However, noshach es hakishus v'hamalafafine, if he were to bite a kishus or malafafine, which, as we've explained multiple times, kishus is the classic cucumber, and malafafine is a name of cucumis mellow. It's a kind of melon which is very similar in nature to the cucumber. These are very rich with liquid, and therefore hamesiton tameh. If a zav were to bite into them, somebody who then causes them to move would become impure because of the liquid from the mouth of the zav, which mixed in. While he takes a bite, the juice of the cucumber causes the saliva of the zav to come out. Halacha hey, klipe poilin, shells of fava beans. These are fava beans. This is the shell around them. Uklipe turmusin, and shells of the turmus bean. It's a very tough bean. We don't know exactly what it is. The Talmud makes reference to it multiple times. It talks about how it's very, very tough, and you have to cook it 7 times in order for it to become edible. And like any bean, it has a shell. So you have shells of fava beans or shells of the turmus bean, that were cut off by a Gentile. And when we say cut off, what we mean is the Gentile cracked the shell open with his mouth. That's how the commentaries explain it. He used his mouth to crack the shell open. Okay. We're going to learn later at the end of this chapter that Gentiles have the same status as a zav. The sages decreed that all idol-worshipping Gentiles should be considered to be a zav. So the same way a zav's saliva transmits impurity, a goy's saliva also transmits impurity. When he cracks the shell open with his mouth, clearly some of his saliva is going to end up on the shell. Therefore, says the Rambam, hamesiton tameh. If somebody were to cause these shells to move, he would become tameh on account of having contacted the saliva of a Gentile. As the commentators explain, obviously we're talking about a case where the saliva is still moist, because once it's dry, it's no longer communicating impurity. Because as we're going to explain, all idol-worshipping Gentiles are considered to be like a zav for all matters. What if you find these shells out in the market? And now you don't know if they were cracked open by a Jew, a regular Jew who would be pure, or by a Gentile who would be a zav and therefore it would make you impure. So you go after the majority. If the majority of people in the area are Gentiles, it's impure. Jews, then it's pure. Halacha vav dam tameh shenis'arev b'mayim. You have impure blood that came from one of these people, and it got mixed into water. Im batlu marav, if its appearance became cancelled, which means, as the commentaries say, you can no longer see. The blood is not evident anymore. In the water, hakol tahar, the entire thing is considered pure. It's just considered pure liquid, and we don't even care about the blood inside of it. Nis'arev bedam tahar ubiyayin. Similarly, if the impure blood got mixed into other pure blood, or into wine, where you certainly cannot see anymore whether the blood disappeared because it's all blood or it's all a dark liquid like wine, you just look at the ratio. You imagine as if the quantity of blood or wine would be water, and you ask yourself, if impure blood got mixed into this quantity of water, would you be able to see it? Then it's impure. Not be able to see it? Then it's pure. This concept, by the way, is only rabbinic, because biblically we have what's called bitul b'roif. It's automatically nullified in the majority. But rabbinically, we go and we look for this benchmark of batlu marav, of not being able to see it anymore. Similar principles apply to impure saliva that got mixed into water. If it remained congealed, like saliva typically is, dense, kind of like this, then it's still impure. But if it then began to disintegrate or melt in the water, if its appearance is nullified, then the entire thing is pure. Same thing as before. If one impure saliva got mixed into a quantity of pure saliva, so now of course you cannot see the difference in texture because it's all saliva. So you treat the quantity as if it was water, and you ask yourself, if spit would have gone into this water, what would happen to it? Same for urine. Impure urine mixed with water. If the appearance of the urine disappeared, it's all pure. If not, it's impure still. If the urine mixed, the impure urine mixed with wine or with pure urine, again, look at the quantity and we say, if it would have been water, would it have disappeared? If yes, then it's pure. If not, then it's impure. If they got mixed into Gentiles' urine. Now when we say they got mixed, one would be inclined to think that we're talking about the same urine as before. If the impure urine got mixed into Gentiles' urine. And there are some commentaries who explain it this way, and there's a whole explanation that they give. We're going to go with the simpler, more straightforward meaning here. Nis'arvu would actually be referring to pure urine. Pure urine got mixed into Gentiles' urine. So even though in the beginning case, when it's talking about an actually impure person, a real zav, if his urine got mixed into other urine, we would go with the quantity of water, and the benchmark would be batlu marav. But if it's just Gentiles' urine, then hilchin achar aroif. Then we go after the majority. The majority is the one that rules. We don't have to care about whether it will disappear in the quantity. Ketzad, what does it mean, majority? Let's say you have a chamber pot, as was customary in those days, or a urinal, where both Jews and Gentiles used to urinate. If the majority of the quantity of the urine inside it could be attributed to Gentiles, hakol tamar, then it's all impure. But if the majority of the quantity could be attributed to Jews, hakol tar, it's all pure. Mechza lemechza, hakol tamar, if it's half and half, then it's all impure, we go stringently. Same if it wasn't the public urinal, it was just two people. One Gentile's urine got mixed with one pure Jew's urine. We go after the majority. Now, I know this sounds very funny. Why would we care about urine mixing? Urine is just garbage, it's waste. But as we know, back in the day, urine was actually used. It was stored and used many times for laundry purposes. I know it sounds a little bit disgusting, but this is how it was back in society's ancient times. They used to use it for dyeing. There was different uses for urine, so you had to know if it's pure or impure. Can I make use of it? As the Rambam mentions right now. Halacha zayin, sheyalin meiraglayim mikol makan. One is allowed to borrow urine from anywhere. He doesn't have to worry that maybe it came from a woman who was a nida, because Jewish girls were never suspect to store their urine when they're nida. When they're nida, they always know. You dispose of the urine, but otherwise you would store it because it's something that you could use, I guess. So you always have to know if it was pure or impure. Halacha ches, cheres, shahaya hazava, mitilin by meragleim. You had a pottery bowl where a zav or a zava used to urinate. Didn't want to mix with anybody else, because they're impure now. This was the zav and the zava's chamber pot. V'chipsai. And now you want to wash it out. You're washing it out, you're cleaning out this chamber pot. Pam rishayna ushniya. The first and second time that you do this washing out, any liquid used in the process of washing out is impure. It absorbs some of the urine that's in the walls of the chamber pot. But the third time, at this point it's already pure. Whether you washed it out with water or with other urine. Because it's definite that at the third time, none of the original urine remains, none of the moisture of the original urine remains, and so it's not going to communicate any impurity. Now, as the commentaries note, there's an additional issue here, which is that kli cheres, pottery utensils, are considered very absorbent, and they never really fully get rid of their status. So if the pottery became impure through the zav urinating in it originally, it will never become pure. So each time you wash it out, the liquid is going to be coming into contact with an impure pottery vessel. So what do we cure? First time, second time, third time. So the commentaries say that here, the issue is not so much the pottery. The pottery broke in a way that declassifies it as being a proper utensil, and it's no longer susceptible to impurity. The issue is only because of the moisture of the urine inside of it, and therefore, it depends. First and second time, it's still impure. Third time, it's already pure. Halacha tes, zava shenekru meimi ragleha b'seif shivas yemei hasfira. A zava, a woman who experiences an irregular blood flow, as we know, if she has it 3 days in a row, she becomes what's called a zava gedola, a major zava. She has to count 7 clean days where she sees no blood flow, and then goes to the mikvah and then becomes pure. So what if a zava, while she's in the midst of counting her 7 days, some urine uproots itself from her bladder and begins to exit her system but doesn't fully exit? Shenekru meimi ragleha b'soif shivas yemei hasfira. The urine exited its place, dislodged from its place, at the very end of the 7 days of counting. But since it's before she went to mikvah, it's still impure urine, because she is still impure. The yard of vitavla, she then goes down, while holding in the urine, she then goes down and immerses to become pure. Vehetila mayim achar hatvila, and then she urinates after the mikvah. Harehin safek, this urine is in doubt. Im achar akira hilchin v'zava haisa, do we follow the dislodgement? And at that point she was still a zava, so the urine is impure. Or we follow when the time of exit of the urine from her system itself, and at that point she's already pure. And so we're actually in doubt about how to treat this urine. Similarly, you have an idol-worshipping Gentile woman who was in the process of conversion. And just before she went to the mikveh for her conversion, some urine dislodged in her system. But then, she holding it in, she went ahead with it, and she converted, went to the mikvah, and then urinated after the immersion. It's a doubt. Do we go after the dislodgement, displacement? They're considered like an idol-worshipping Gentile's urine, which is impure. Or after the exit, and it's now like urine of regular pure Jews, and it's also pure. So there's a doubt, unresolved doubt. Halacha Yud, here the Rambam goes into what we said before, the source for the fact that Gentiles are declared like a zav. Ha'avadim, slaves, mitamin beziva o benida o beleda ki Yisrael. For these topics are like Jews. They can become impure with ziva, irregular discharge or blood flow, with nida, with birth, like Jews. Avalai the kechavim, but Gentiles, ein mitamin, lei beziva, v'lei benidos, v'lei beleda din taira. Biblically, they have no relevance to this whole idea of ziva, nida, and leda. Shenemar, because it says, and then Rambam only brings the verse about a zav, it says, Dabru al b'nei Yisrael, va'amartem alehem, ish ki azav. Speak to the Jews, tell them, if any man becomes a zav, which means b'nei Yisrael mitamin beziva, v'lo ya'iv dekechavim, only Jews become impure with ziva, but not Gentiles. And there's considerable discussion in the commentaries why that Rambam doesn't bring the verse for the other things, for nida, for leda, how do we know it? There's a Teres Koyanim where it's mentioned, but others say that Rambam doesn't agree with that. See the commentaries for further discussion. At any rate, by biblical law, the Gentiles have no part in these impurities. Nevertheless, the rabbis came along and they decreed that all idol-worshipping Gentiles, they should have the status of being impure like a zav for all matters. Both boys and girls, males and females. But it's a minimum age. Boys from the age of 9, girls from the age of 3. But children younger than that, they didn't make a decree of impurity, because the whole reason for this decree, why did we want to declare them like zavim and distance ourselves from them? Unfortunately, in those days, many Gentiles were suspect about homosexuality. And so we wanted to keep Jewish children away from them because it wouldn't lead to certain questionable behaviors. But less than the age of 9, their relations has no significance. So it wouldn't be considered an act of homosexuality, so there's no need to create that distance younger than that age. The Rambam doesn't talk about the girls. The commentaries explain, for the girls, it's more of an idea of staying away for intermarriage. We wanted to distance ourselves from them from intermarriage, and since at 3 years old a woman becomes viable enough to have relations, so at that point the decree of impurity goes into effect. Be'ez shegazru alein, says the Rambam, when the sages made the decree on Gentiles, they wanted everyone to know that it's somewhat different than biblical law. This decree is not biblical. So how did they make it recognizable? Lo gazru al shichva zera shelahen. They did not decree impurity on their semen. Ela shichva zara shelo yevdike chavim tahira kedin tahira. The semen of a Gentile is pure like biblical law. Why did they not decree impurity on it? To make it known that this is only a rabbinic impurity. Because everybody knows that if there would be a zav by biblical law, their semen would be an av, a primary source of impurity, like the semen of a zav. And now that you say that it's not impure, now you know it's only rabbinic. But once you know that it's rabbinic, you will treat it with rabbinic status. If that source of impurity comes into contact with truma or sacrificial meat, they won't burn it. When biblical impurity touches truma or sacrificial meat, we burn it. But now that's only rabbinic, we're not going to burn it. And say salamed. So now you learn the following, taking everything into account. The discharge of a male Gentile, the blood flow, regular or irregular, or birth of a woman Gentile, and the males and females of Gentiles themselves, even though they don't have any blood discharges right now, but their body themselves, their saliva and their urine, and things they lie on and things they ride on. And if somebody has relations with a Gentile woman, all of these become primary sources of impurity, but only rabbinic. Therefore, if you became impure in this way and you went into the temple, or you ate sacrificial meat, you're not going to be liable for it. You won't burn truma if they come into contact with such an impurity. The kulan, however, they all do have all powers of sources of impurity. Metam'ei adam v'kelim b'maga, they will transmit their impurity to people and utensils by touching. Or metam'ei adam b'masa, and they will transmit their impurity to people, only people, not utensils, by carrying. Kezav l'chol davar, like kazav, for all matters. With the exception that it's only rabbinic, not biblical. And the Rambam concludes that there's one more difference between Gentiles and Jews in this regard. The dam hanachris, the blood that emits from a Gentile woman. So even though when it came to a Jewish woman, what did we say? That a Jewish woman's blood is metam'ei lach v'yavesh. Both it transmits impurity both when it's moist and when it's dry. But for a Gentile woman, it's kiruko kamei ragla. It has the same status as saliva and urine. Metam'ei lach ve'eina metam'ei yavesh. It only transmits impurity when it's moist, not when it's dry. And what is the reason? Same thing. The rabbis wanted it to be discernible that this is a rabbinic impurity and not a biblical one.